resilient communities in Montana oil and gas industry. I was a little late. Yes, thank you. We have two panelists with us, Jill Morrison and she will be the first on our list of speakers. Jill has a strong connection to the agricultural community as she grew up on her family farm in western Nebraska. She graduated from Arizona State University with a BA in English, which is why she writes so well. While there, she volunteers in community organization. Jill worked for several years in a foundation, as a journalist, focusing on investigative pieces that included environmental components. In a search to reconnect with her rural roots, Jill joined the staff at Powder River Basin Resource Council, our affiliate in Wyoming, in 1990. One of the main campaigns at Powder River Basin is focused on coal bed methane, which we also had a lot of in our state, where industry proposed 50,000 coal bed methane wells. 50,000. The impacts of this process changed the character of the Powder River Basin. Jill and Powder River Basin Resource Council organized many landowners throughout the area, from Sheridan to Gillette, and joined with ranchers here in Montana and Northern Plains Resource Council to fight. This fight went on for 15 to 20 years and is still not really over. They worked on getting the damage reclaimed and the wells plugged. They got the split estate law passed, which gives landowners more rights in negotiations. And they got the eminent domain laws strengthened. Jill worked to get dozens of ranchers' water wells replaced by industry. We are excited to learn more about Jill's experiences protecting our region's water and land and air. Sterling Grogan, who I just met, marvelous individual, received a bachelor's degree in political science and a master of science in soils from the California Polytechnic State University and a postgraduate degree from the University of New Mexico. He served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Brazil and a soldier in Vietnam. Thank you for your service. He was a watershed ecologist at Compendium West. He is an author of the New Mexico's first watershed protection and alternative energy plans. Sterling worked for 40 years rehabilitating damaged ecosystems in New Mexico, Latin America, and Central Asia. His projects included land reclamation, industrial ecology, wildlife protections, research, and teaching in ecology and environmental policy. And besides all that, Sterling and his wife, Ann, also managed and taught holistic management at a ranch in Northwest New Mexico. And we are really excited to have Sterling join us as well today. So first of all, I'm going to let Jill take it away. And I want you to give a warm welcome to both of our speakers. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Sue. And thanks to all the Northern Plains staff and the organizing committee for this, and to all of you for being here. And mostly to all of you for your efforts, past and ongoing, to hold industry regulators and our elected officials accountable for protecting our environment. May we never stop. So I want to start this with a quote from Wendell Berry, which I think many of you may be familiar with. There is nothing under the ground, nothing under the ground that's worth more than the little layer of topsoil sitting on top of it. I spent 31 years of my life as a community organizer with Powder River, and I witnessed firsthand the disregard by the oil and gas industry for, I'm going to try to see if I can make this work. I don't think I can make the slide. You might have to just go ahead and click through them, and there's no special, you can just kind of move forward. But so they were proposing 50,000 coal bed methane wells. They actually drilled 30,000. And developing any type of oil and gas is a myriad of impacts, as you can see as we click through these slides. I mean, thousands of miles of roads and power lines and pipelines. And industry and regulators gave no thought to reclamation whatsoever. These were lined pits that they put a bunch of waste oil, I guess, and then we would call them toxic burritos. They would just fold that plastic over and bury it. And what we need to make happen is reclamation needs to be a part of the conversation before you begin to even remove one shovelful of soil. It's been a complete afterthought. The oil and gas industry didn't even recognize topsoil. So unlike the coal industry, which due to Northern Plains and Powder River is required since 1977 under the Strip Mine Act to have a plan for how to develop that, to take the topsoil, segregate it, cover, armor it, everything has to be segregated. There has to be a whole plan. Not in the oil and gas industry. They just go in, and as my mentor and friend at Powder River for Digger Moravik used to tell me, it's the rape, ruin, and run strategy. And that is completely what happened in the Powder River Basin. Damage to water quality and quantity, the spread of noxious weeds, the contamination of soil, the erosion, and the long-term loss of land's carrying capacity, and a reduction in property values and a loss of income. So what we have been working on, and you all have been working on, is bonding and reclamation standards, which are so critical. You can just keep flipping through some of these photos which show these damages. This is erosion from discharge produced water. What's happened is the oil and gas industry for decades since the beginning has waltzed away from these messes because state agencies and the federal government hasn't required any adequate bonding or reclamation to ensure that the land and water would be reclaimed and the damage from drilling and all the infrastructure would be minimized. The oil and gas industry has been given a free pass by most of the state oil and gas commissions and by the federal government for cleanup, plugging, and reclamation. And that has happened until just recently when we started showing these photos. This was a ditch dug on this property. It has been reclaimed to handle produced water. That they just ran through, they condemned this property to do that. And that's what led to us strengthening condemnation laws, giving landowners more rights. The industry had to negotiate with you first. But the business plan for the oil and gas industry is to come in, take the cream off the top, and then once the production starts to fall, they just pass it off to a mom and pop and walk away from the mess. And then there's a bankruptcy, or not even oftentimes is there enough money for bankruptcy. They just walk away and leave behind. So we began working, began with the landowners, and we would just take all these photographs and take all these sites, and we would go to regulators and to elected officials and show them photos of these football size, two or three football field size pits, and say, you've got to bond these. And the Oil and Gas Commission, the DEQ, and the BLM, which told us they couldn't raise it, they all saw that this was a gigantic liability, and they all came in and required industry to bond for the full replacement and reclamation of those gigantic pits. Where they were in one of the pictures earlier. They started, we petitioned Oil and Gas Commission to raise the bonding, which they did. We actually got them to engage in an active effort to go back and look at how many idle wells were out there, what needed to be plugged. We were attending every single monthly meeting and pointing these issues up. It was, I often had amazingly brave members, women and men. I especially liked organizing the women who were often telling me to, well, my husband could do that. And I was like, oh, I know, but so could you. And I would be the bad cop in the meetings, and they would be the good cop. And it was a very effective strategy with a lot of these regulators. But we had many successes in getting more rights for landowners to negotiate, for landowners to do some of their own requirements for industry in their contracts, to be sure reclamation happens, that landowners could do their own. The biggest problems, we finally got BLM to go out and look at what was happening on the ground and do an analysis. The biggest problems they found on the ground in this analysis with all the development of these coal bed methane wells, and this was about a few years before the real bust set in, was lack of the topsoil salvage and saving, which you can't have any good reclamation without that. So no seeding, no, you know, they'd seed it, but nothing would come back. So what would you have? A sea of noxious weeds. So the university began an education process of industry on reclamation standards. The BLM began that type of process. I mean, it's like taking the industry, because we haven't required them to do anything, that like they're in kindergarten, you got a plan, has to be in your mind up front, and it's still an everyday battle with industry. I want to come up saying that let's just forward on this a couple back, because I think you went back. I want to go to I think it was a few slides in. Keep going. Oh yeah, no worries. I think it's a split side. I saw. Keep going. Oh, this I was. Keep going. Oh no, that pit on the other side of this. That was some of those gigantic pits that would just pour the highly saline produced water into, and then think they were going to walk away from not reclaiming that. We had to use a lot of interesting strategies like press all the time. We were holding press conferences with landowners out in the middle of these places, showing pictures. We did an entire art exhibit with photographers at the UCross Foundation in conjunction with them. And it toured around. The industry got Nicolaisen Museum to say they were going to have it, and then they got them to not have it, which got more publicity on the issue. But there's a lot of innovative ways you can highlight the importance of reclamation and bonding, and showing people what's happening in our landscapes. So we got to think about it up front. before you even do anything, because then you can also think about how do we reduce that footprint. And I cannot emphasize enough how important citizen action and input is. I mean, that is the only thing that made a difference here. And I can't emphasize that you can never give up, and it must be endless pressure, endlessly applied. And we have got to hold the oil and gas industry to the same high reclamation standards as we do to the coal industry. But we all know, even once we have those regulations, it's still an ongoing task to make sure it happens. And we have to hold industry accountable and require the richest and most powerful industry in this country and the world to act responsibly. I want to end with one other quote. And this is by someone who's anonymous. I never saw it attributed to anyone. And it used to be on the desk of a fellow organizer of mine. Humans, despite our artistic pretensions, our sophistication, and many accomplishments, owes our existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains.
Thank you, Jill. That was wonderful, extremely moving, and I can't emphasize enough how much topsoil means to us. And to go on with that, I'm going to introduce Sterling and let him talk about how we make that topsoil and keep it going.
Okay, does that seem to be working? Okay, good. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much. Thanks to Northern Plains for inviting me to speak to you today. I don't know anything about Montana. I live in New Mexico, which might as well be another country. But I do have some experience with oil and gas and coal. I'd like to begin by suggesting, as a follow-up to what Jill was talking about, that this movement, whatever the movement might be, has an anthem, or should have an anthem. And my vote for that anthem is the Keb Mo song. Keb Mo is a blues guitarist from Los Angeles. He put out a song a couple of years ago called "Put a Woman in Charge," and I think he's got it. I think that should be our anthem. The information I'm going to give you this morning about oil and gas is from my friend Don Schreiber, a rancher in San Juan Basin, northwest New Mexico. He has several thousand acres of BLM land on his place, and several hundred wells, half of which are abandoned, no identifiable owner. The thing about oil and gas reclamation is, as Jill suggested to you, is that even when wells are quote unquote reclaimed, usually abandoned wells, it's often the reclamation is often inadequate because there are 3 elements of reclamation of oil and gas properties that have to be drilling sites anyway, that have to be addressed. One is proper plugging, and that, in my view, as an ecologist, the most important thing about that is you've got to figure out how to isolate any aquifers that the drill might penetrate. Secondly, you've got to remediate the damage. And that usually means removing the soil that has been contaminated by oil and gas operations, and put that in what the industry euphemistically refers to as a land farm. I don't know where they got that idea, but that's someplace where the petroleum residues can supposedly gas off. I don't think it works very well, but that's what they do. And the bonding is usually inadequate. In almost all cases, the bonding is inadequate, especially inadequate to address some of the places that are contaminated by produced water, as Jill pointed out. For coal mining, the 1977 Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act did establish strict criteria for reclamation bonds, but in arid environments like New Mexico and much of Montana, I think, my experience is that the reclamation, it's very hard to determine whether the post-mining land use, which is a great feature of the law, requiring the operator to establish a post-mining land use and do reclamation in such a way as that land use can be achieved. Very often it's some form of grazing. It's really hard to do that in an arid environment, just the way that the environment works. So there's a long period, many years, required to determine whether or not that reclamation is going to be successful. And the bonding process that I was involved in with a large coal surface mine on the Navajo Reservation in Northwest New Mexico, it's hard to get the money, to extract that money out of the industry and keep it in such a way as it will actually cover the real cost of reclamation. It's not an easy task. Reclamation, well, I mentioned the reclamation in oil and gas. The thing that we learned at the Navajo mine is that livestock can be a very useful tool for ecological restoration. Of course, reclamation on large areas has to take into consideration something to do with the water, the occasional rain or snow, snow melt. So that's a complication. But once you've got the shape of the land established, then the restoration of the vegetation community can be accomplished using livestock, carefully managed livestock. At Navajo, we leased cattle, sheep, and goats from the Navajo ranchers who ranched around the mine, and it was quite successful, actually. I'd like to suggest that sitting in this room is the people in this room are a huge, potentially very effective tool for reclamation, because your livestock can be an effective tool, properly managed. On each of the tables, I think there is a newsletter from the Center for Holistic Management in Albuquerque. It just has some contacts, and you have great resources here in Montana. There's several people who can help you with the tool of animal impact and herd effect and those other things that we talk about in holistic management. It actually works. The Navajo mine experience is that industry doesn't necessarily like it, but it's actually effective. And in arid environments, you need every tool at your disposal, and livestock are an excellent tool. I'd just like to mention that in my view, one of the most encouraging new developments in this whole field is new attention that is being paid to the 5 soil health principles. And if you Google, God, I guess that's replaced libraries now, huh? That's a horrible thought. But anyway, everybody's got their own, everybody who thinks about this has their own view of what those 5 soil health principles are. I'll just mention the 5 that I think are the keys. keep soil covered, that is armor. Cover crops are probably the most effective way to do that. Minimize the disturbance, makes sense. Plant a diversity of vegetation if you're planting, or encourage native diverse planting. Keep those roots living and thriving, and last but not least, integrate animals with your operation, whatever it might be. I think that's probably all I need to talk about right now, and hopefully we'll get some questions later. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you both, Sterling and Jill. This has been a great presentation. Now I'd like to open it up to questions. And first I'm going to ask Edward Barta, who is also on our oil and gas task force, if there's anything that he would like to ask either Jill or Sterling, because we're working really hard with our board and hopefully there's something they can give us to help that along. And then I'll open it up to the general public.
Good morning. Thank you for that very remarkable presentation. It was very interesting, and I have a list of questions here for you, some of which you've already answered. So I don't want to ask those again because you kind of make me sound like I wasn't paying attention. But anyhow, as Sue indicated, those of us on the Board of Oil and Gas or on the Oil and Gas Task Force attend the Board of Oil and Gas meetings all the time. They know of our presence. We keep them honest, we think. They acknowledge the power of Northern Plains, and so they do a good job of listening, but they don't really do a good job of doing what we want them to do, unfortunately. And so one of the questions that we have in our working with this board is, what advice would you have to push these agencies with oversight over this to do a better job and to do it right? We just need some advice on how to maybe be more successful in our interventions with this board.
Well, and this pressure endlessly applied. I'm sure, one of the measures we used often was to highlight the problem publicly with visual imagery, stories from people impacted. Try to get some of these members on the board aside in some one-on-one conversations. We would also take proactive measures by drafting up a petition for rulemaking on what we wanted to see, like we've done with the BLM bonding rule, and submit it. At every commission has a process where you can submit the public, the citizens, and that kind of pushes them to react to that, and you can do a lot of publicity around that. But you have to take the initiative to say, and just continue to put that issue out there in the public as much as possible. I also can't say don't underestimate the power of art. Photography, other types of art, poetry, stories. Art captures people's imagination and can highlight a problem in ways that we often overlook. So some other creative approaches often bring new attention. And just how much it's costing the taxpayer too is always like the taxpayers of the US government. We just spent about $5 billion plugging. And that's not just the reclamation, that's just plugging the orphan oil and gas wells in a few states.
I'd just like to add, I served for several years on the Resource Advisory Council for Northwest New Mexico for the Bureau of Land Management. And what I observed in that period was that the Bureau of Land Management absolutely does not react to any direction other than from Washington. Their directions come from Washington, and the way to communicate with the BLM in Washington is through your congressional delegation. I saw many other approaches, and the suggestions Jill had are absolutely appropriate, but the BLM is a very difficult animal to control.
Thank you. In our conversations with the Board of Oil and Gas, we've mainly been focusing on bonding, but we're beginning this discussion about reclamation, and I'm looking forward to our talking with them, particularly with regard to topsoil. They've told us they do reclamation, but we're interested in having that conversation about what they're doing with topsoil. I really love those quotes. Those quotes are keepers. I hope somebody's Northern Plains is marking those down somewhere, but they're wonderful quotes. But you've answered this a little bit, but another question that I have is, are there any roles for land stewards or communities to plan successful reclamation efforts? Are there opportunities for collaboration that invites ranchers to participate in the reclamation of their own land? You mentioned cattle grazing and that kind of stuff, and I was wondering if there's anything else you might have in mind for that.
Well, I sometimes find myself in situations where it sounds a little bit trite, but I think it's actually accurate that ranchers and farmers are the appropriate stewards of the land to get involved in problems like oil and gas development. And I can't emphasize enough that you have right there on your land, you have wonderful tools for ecological restoration. And I have not been successful in promoting this idea among regulatory agencies, but I have seen it work at Navajo Mine. It works very well. And so that would be my suggestion.
One of the successful things we did in working with the local Buffalo BLM field office, which was overseeing all the federal mineral, which was all mostly split estate in the Powder River Basin. We had our landowner, rancher, farmer members. We would get BLM out in the field with us, the inspectors, to look at the problems. We would get them, and BLM is supposed to do an on-site prior to development, and we really emphasize that happening with the landowner, and so they could shape how it would happen before it happens. So you know, in some cases the industry comes in heavy-handed and does some condemnation action like happened with it. But the BLM Buffalo field office took a leadership role nationally in moving forward reclamation standards because of the extensive development, and in raising bonding. And some of this new rule that they put out is based on what they started in the Buffalo field office, because we were whacking them over the head on a regular basis, and either bringing our members in the field office to meet with them, and then getting those people out on the landscape with the landowners. So that's really important. And again, if you can get press or publicity, I think that helps.
I'd like to add something to that. From personal experience, if you have oil and gas development on your property, or you have a neighbor who does, know what your rights are, know what your lease says, and hold them to it. Don't be afraid to tackle them. They will push back. They will tell you that they don't have to do that, but if they have it in writing, they do have to do that. And don't be afraid to go to the Board of Oil and Gas with your complaints about a specific company, because they will respond, sometimes slowly. Don't give up. Don't let them do what they're not allowed to do. Make them follow what their regulations are, what your lease says, and what the state says they have to do.
Speaking of being able to meet with powers, Northern Plains was able to actually meet with Tracy Stone Manning here last year about the bonding, federal bonding requirements. We were able to also meet with Senator Tester's office and Senator Daines' office as well. So, but there's much more to come with regard to that bonding issue that we'll be asking people to help us get that passed, which it hasn't been passed yet. But so I'm going to pass the microphone over here to John, and if anybody else would like to have a question, if we could kind of organize a line over here to facilitate time. So if you do that, that'd be great. Okay, John.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for your presentation here. I have just a quick question here. So as I promised last night, we're going to be keeping our event that's coming up in April on the forefront. We have a Soil Health Week coming up in April, and I want to know what both of you think about what would be a good approach. I guess I could have done that rather than dig a hole for my feet to go into. What would be an approach to use in using that Soil Health Week to focus on these sites that you pointed out, and yeah, I guess that's my question.
I think that's a great idea. Especially in terms of the importance of topsoil, the lack of industry's acknowledgement of the importance of topsoil, and also because this bonding rule at the federal level, there's a lot of political jockeying right now in Congress and riders and whatnot to try to, the oil and gas industry is using their friends in Congress to try to kill it. And it's really important right now to push hard because the oil and gas industry, they want to keep on with the free pass they've had. They don't want to be burdened with having to think about reclamation and topsoil, and we have to actually have a bond to cover that. It's just insane that they've operated this way, and we need to highlight it at every opportunity we get.
The other thing I would add to that is that, as I mentioned, there is this new attention in many different forums to the 5 soil health principles, and I think you could build a program for your April event around those soil health principles, because I think they address the problems that in a different way, in a maybe less threatening way than some other approaches. So remember the 5 soil health, whatever the 5 soil health principles are that your source that you believe in, that appeals to you, whatever they say is just fine.
Carol?
My name's Carol Mick. I'm a professional geologist, and I've been living this problem since I was a geologist, working in the field as a petroleum geologist and also doing work in a coal mining operation, and have lost jobs because of my opinion. And I want to really get ecstatic about, I'm finally happy that there's some people joining me with this. But one of the things, because of my science background, I want to kind of caution you that you don't paint your boundaries too small. You need to look beyond them, especially when you're considering about soil, because where does the soil come from? From the rock beneath. How does the rock become the soil? That technique is very important to understand. But I'll tell you what, one of the greatest engineers who has not gone to school, and I don't know if they're in your livestock department or animal section, but any boring animal does more for topsoil than anything we could do. And prairie dogs are number one. They supported the grasslands for the bison. And so when you see a prairie dog, tell them thank you, because they're doing a good job, and make sure they don't get killed. Like some people seem to think they're a pest. The people are more of the pests than these prairie dogs are. I tell you that right now. So just that's an encouraging word for you. So I hope to see you guys out there doing good work. I have an animal ministry now too, so that's my soapbox.
Next.
Yeah, I'm curious about how they handle mud pits nowadays. Oil, the drilling mud pits. And the reason I asked is 40 some years ago, I had a short-term job driving a water truck for a water hauling outfit out of Rock Springs, Wyoming. And one of the jobs we were sent to was to pump out a mud pit up on the south of Rock Springs, quite a ways up in the Forest Service. And it was a failed well. They had all kinds of problems with it. There was a mix of mud, all different colors, all different densities, everything else. Also, I also know from the past, growing up in the Roundup area, a lot of oil field workers up there, that the mud pits were basically a dump for anything and everything. So I don't know how much of that still goes on, and what I'm really curious about how mud pits are handled, particularly at a federal, if there's any federal guidelines or regulations and so forth. Thanks.
Well, there's a new technique where they don't need those pits, but it's a cheap way to run. But they recycle all the drilling fluids. It's a closed loop system. And, it's what's now the problem is the produced water is a bigger problem than the mud pits, because they can just do a closed loop system. And that's a best management practice, which is what they should be doing. Now the lesser, the big guys are pretty much doing it. I don't know about the small wildcatters. You're gonna have to watch that, and you're gonna have to, again, it should be a regulation required in the oil and gas rules and regs that they got to use a closed loop drilling system. The pits, the produced water and the fracking produced water from the fracking fluids is the big problem now, and there are these huge produced water facilities where they're taking this to be evaporated, and you can just about pass out when you drive by them from the toxic chemicals coming off of them. That's the really big problem, bigger problem now, and the use of fresh water for fracking. So getting a handle on those issues, it needs some work.
Terrifying. I want to give you a couple of terrifying numbers. I served for a year on the state of New Mexico State University's produced water task force. So there's a nationwide organization of scientists and regulators who are concerned about produced water. It's really a terrifying prospect, because the research that has been done on produced water to date indicates that there might be as many as 600 identifiable chemicals in produced water, the water that comes up from a drilling operation, oil and gas drilling operation. So 600 is a potential. Now, not every gallon of produced water has 600 identifiable pollutants or contaminants in it, but many do. Of those 600, the industry officially in dealing with regulatory agencies, the oil and gas industry has determined that 300 of those 600 chemicals, 300 are proprietary, and therefore they don't release the names or the formulas for those 300 chemicals. And so if, as is happening right now in New Mexico at New Mexico State University, there's this very elaborate movement to figure out how to use produced water in agriculture. It is a terrifying prospect, and it's one that I hope every one of you, if you're given the difficult opportunity, would complain about, because there are very few agricultural interests involved in this process, and I think it's going on in other states. So beware.
Next.
A question for you, Sterling. You mentioned that livestock was used pretty successfully at the Navajo mine. And then you also mentioned in your talk that there seems to be some resistance to this. It seemed that this would be a pretty easy win-win to use local ranchers to do reclamation, and everybody wins on this. Well, where is the resistance coming from?
Well, there are the first resistance is people don't like Alan Savory. And I understand that he has a very checkered, had a very checkered history in Montana. So that's part of the resistance. The other resistance is simply that everyone, and I put myself in that, is resistant to change. Change is a really difficult thing. And using holistic management to manage large herds of livestock is not a simple matter, no matter how you do it. I mean, if you use the Columbus method, you know, it's not easy to do. But the thing is, it works. And it is a planning process. It's a decision-making process that actually works, that actually gets the job done. But it's different, it's change, and your neighbors might not support you. So those are the elements of resistance that I have observed.
Yeah, and the biggest element of resistance I've seen is ignorance. They aren't educated about the benefits, and it's just and a lot of it's from the regulators' end of it. Not wanting livestock on reclaimed area because they think it will destroy the revegetation. So education is really key here with regulators and getting it implemented as a best management practice. And you know, there's a process for doing that. There's a way you can do it. And I think it's really important to try to work with scientists in the university community that are working on this and get them in with you, with the regulators. And I think it can move forward more quickly.
Next.
Well, John.
Tiptoes, Jules.
Well, it's better than this, right?
One
thank you
moment.
for being here. First of all, I really enjoyed our conversations. Well, that's better. So, like, I'm also on the oil and gas task force, and I do attend the Board of Oil and Gas meetings. And one of the things that's frustrating to me is nobody talks about injection wells, where, you know, the drillers inject at high pressure the produced water deep down into the ground, potentially affecting aquifers. It's got it's got a lot of salt in it. So I'm wondering, I would like to find a way to focus us on injection wells, and I'm wondering what your experience has been.
Yeah, we have challenged injection wells in certain places due to concerns about not being in the right aquifer zone. And the other thing is it's always also about enforcement, that the requirement for mechanical integrity testing on every well is supposed to be done, like at least in Wyoming, every 3 years, so that you know that these wells are sound and it's going into the formation and having some monitoring wells around there. I mean, we've been fighting successfully so far injection wells into the Madison aquifer. We've defeated those proposals. I think we're on our 4th time. And have had a really important ally in that fight, which is the Arapaho Eastern Shoshone uh, injection well into a freshwater aquifer saying, oh, it's too deep, we'll never use it. And we've had to hire scientific experts. And I mean, sometimes you have to do that. You have to go out and find the scientific experts we have hired in some of the fights have been critical to the information on the record, to the science, to give the regulators the backbone to do the right thing. But you have to raise the money to hire the experts.
Next.
Hello, my name is Deb Skites, and I'd like for either of you or both of you to elaborate a little bit more on the bonding process. This seems to me critical to capitalism, that the extractive industries, companies within the industries stop socializing the external pollution costs. And how do they have, how is there some kind of formula that is looked at to devise to understand how much is needed? And then how is that process looked at over time? It seems to me like sometimes people have said that there isn't enough, or the bonding is inadequate. It may seem so initially, but then eventually prove to be more. Thank you.
Well, for state mineral and fee mineral in each state, that bonding is from the Oil and Gas Commission. For the federal wells, the bonding is from the Bureau of Land Management. It's in the past and until recently, both at most of the state commissions and the federal, it's been a blanket bond. So that means you can cover for the BLM right now. You can be a company that has thousands, tens of thousands of wells across the country, and you just have $125,000 blanket bond. I mean, it's insane, really ridiculous. It's a joke. So the rule now is to make it per well bond. What we did in the state and what we got in Wyoming, and I think working in Montana, is they had like a $25,000 blanket bond. During the COVID methane boom, we got them to raise it up to like 100,000. Now it's like, I think it's 150,000, but if that well sits idle for 3 years, it's $10 a foot per well. Which is better because you're getting closer to the amount to plug it, but you're really not taking into consideration the surface reclamation. You're just taking the plugging. So, getting rules enacted that requires the surface reclamation assessment to be in there. And BLM's done more individual well bonds that the field offices have authority for that, but they never implemented it until recently, and the last few years, at least in Wyoming, out of the Buffalo field office, and they went to New Mexico to help New Mexico implement a similar program. I know the folks we were badgering in Wyoming finally did it.
What I would add to what Jill brought up is two things. One, you have to get the industry to establish, even if it's a split mineral, split estate where the mineral is owned by an entity different from the surface, but you have to get the surface, as Jill mentioned, the surface reclamation is absolutely key to achieving a reasonable post-operation, post-drilling land use. And that land use has to dictate what the reclamation will be. In most cases, on an awful lot of land, that is grazing, that post-mining land use is grazing, but it's not going to be achievable immediately in the arid parts of the West. So there's got to be a reasonable time limit so that you've got, so that the vegetation has time to mature. And so that you can establish that post-mining land use and maintain the post-mining land use. So it's post-mining land use. And then the other part of it is that the plugging of the well is not the whole show. You've got to have a commitment to remediate any damage, and usually that's petroleum products contaminating the soil, and then in addition to that, the surface has to be what's visible has to be reestablished to a specific degree. And what I've observed in these blanket bonds is that's absolutely those elements of reclamation are absolutely ignored.
Okay, we're running really short on time. One more quick question.
My name is Tom Tao, and as an attorney, I ran into a client who had some problems up on the High Line near Harvard. And what you said about mom and pop companies taking over is exactly right. Those wells are not producing very much, and the big companies aren't interested. So we're dealing with quite a different group at that point. Well, I was concerned because I was absolutely convinced that some of the oil and other bad things was going to come down the hill at the bottom where he had a very nice water dam that was necessary for his cattle. What could I do? I tried to get some experts. You know, that's the only thing that's going to help you at all. It costs $30,000 just to get a start, 50 or more, if you really want to do a good job, because that's pretty complicated and it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort and by experts. So that didn't work. Then I found out that they had used a lot of these mud plots, and they moved one to another around, and they were not very large, but some acres involved in that. And I insisted that that company do something about that. Well, what did they do? They loaded up the topsoil and put it in a truck or a manure spreader, I guess, and spread it out on a field. And I said, that doesn't seem to help. Oh, that works well. We don't have any problem. That's even better for the soil. And so what do? Have you run into those problems?
Quick response.
Yes, and I mean, it kind of goes back. Don't ever sign a lease agreement for oil and gas if you own the minerals until you have a surface use agreement negotiated about what you want.
Yes.
Don't ever sign a lease first. You want to protect, if you own any mineral rights, you want to protect your surface, and the only way to do that is to negotiate a surface use agreement for the use of that surface. On the problem you're talking about, like somebody did that years ago and this thing is going on, it gets passed on, and from one bad operator to the next. You got to get the regulators involved, and it's just, you have to highlight the problems over and over and do show and tells, and I mean, just do as much as you can to get the proper regulators to require that operator to clean it up. Yeah, I say keep going.
I would just add that use the words offsite damages, and because oil and gas, as everyone knows, it's not just the drill pad, it's the roads that connect the drill pad to transportation facilities, to a pipeline perhaps, or to a road. So there are legitimate concerns about offsite damages, and that's one of the things that's got to be in that lease that Jill talked about.
Okay, I know we're running a little bit over, but I wanted to get those last questions in. I want to thank our panelists. Please give them a big round of applause. If you don't have any more questions, I think they'll be hanging around here for a while. All of our members of the Board Oil and Gas Task Force that are here and the Soils Committee, would you please raise your hand? Okay, look around at these people. If you have questions, please buttonhole one of us and ask us. There's also an action table. And we are going to take a break now for 15 minutes and we'll see you back shortly.